Reparations working group.
I was trying to send you the meeting ID, so I couldn't do both, but I started the recording.
George.
Okay, excuse me, what was it? You asked me to do, Sister Teresa. The recording came up. I couldn't hear what you were saying.
Introduce yourself and then make sure everyone else present introduces themselves.
All right.
And then I will introduce Lucy.
Okay. Well, greetings. This is Fatima from New Orleans. Glad to see you all. I'm being trained as to how to be a proper WILF convener. So I'm happy that everybody's here. And I'm very anxious to hear our speaker and get everything started.
So, Fatima, call on people, everybody other than Lucy. So, George, why don't you start to introduce yourself and help Fatima get everyone else introduced except Lucy?
I'm George Friday in Shelby, North Carolina, the Southern Piedmont branch. And I'm glad to be here and also looking forward to hearing from our speaker. I'll pass it on to Barbara West.
I'm Barbara West. Am I still muted?
No, not muted.
We can hear you.
Okay. I'm in Bath, Maine, and glad to be here.
Miss Goddard.
Oh, I've passed it on to somebody. I'll pass it on to Lucy.
We're leaving Lucy to last, Barbara.
Oh, I misunderstood. Okay. How about Samantha?
You have to unmute, Samantha.
I'm unmuting and I'm saying hello on the video. Hello, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. I'm Samantha Turner. I'm in Charlotte. I'm in the Southern Piedmont, and I'm really happy about this new decade. So George knows that I have a ton of work going on, but I want to do what I can with this committee. Thank you.
So somebody would have called on me, not necessarily next CC, but anyway, this is Joan Goddard, and in the San Jose, California branch, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm, again, also really glad to be here and looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Lucy, or to share. Thanks. And I will call on CC.
Good evening, CC Anderson in Atlanta. And the Personnel Committee Chair. Thank you.
Is that everybody, or is there someone we've missed?
Nobody missed. You covered everybody except Lucy.
Okay.
I will introduce Lucy.
No.
Lucy and I go way back. Lucy Murphy is a cultural artist and revolutionary fighter. We met in the late 80s when I first heard her sing Links on the Chain when I was a union organizer in Cleveland, Ohio. And for all of these years, I've looked for every reason to get Lucy to come to sing. And Lucy sang at the founding conference in 1999 of the Southern Anti-Racism Network. So Lucy is a founding member of SARN, and she has traveled to Cuba on many occasions, and she traveled to Cuba most recently about the UN decade. And when she was speaking at the Southeast Regional Gathering, she only had 7 minutes. So it was not enough time for her to give a full report. And we're asking that she give a full report this evening on her trip to Cuba for the UN decade. So Lucy, please introduce yourself further if you would like, and we're ready to listen to you.
Thank you, Teresa. I see that Barbara just joined us. Barbara, would you like to introduce yourself? You have to unmute.
Yeah, I muted everyone but you, Lucy.
Oh, okay. So Barbara will, oh, okay, she's unmuted now.
I introduced myself a while ago.
Oh,
I'm from Maine.
oh, and you were in the car.
No?
No? Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm
Hang in
Lucy
there.
Murphy in Washington, D.C., organizer for the D.C., Maryland, Virginia branch of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And I'll just begin with my report. In coordination with the United Nations, the Cuban government sponsored the International Conference on the Decade of People of African Descent, December 9th through the 13th in Havana and Matanzas. In late September 2024, the Cuban Ministry of Foreign Relations, MINREX, sent Afro-Cuban diplomat Patricia Pego to Washington to convene a meeting of academics, activists, and friends of Cuba and announce the conference in December to end the decade and fulfill three objectives. Number one, to publicize the efforts of the Cuban Revolution to end racial discrimination. Two, to learn about the efforts of other countries to end racial discrimination. Three, to learn of non-governmental efforts to end racism. The Cuban government invited known friends of Cuba and intellectuals who study racism and colonialism in general and Cuban society in particular. The cost of registration was $250, and the visa for those coming from the US was $70, in addition to airfare and housing. I flew Southwest Airlines to Cuba from Baltimore Washington International Airport, made arrangements to stay with friends whom I met when I lived in Havana in 2010 through 2011. The organizers encouraged delegates to book one of three hotels, but homestays were allowed. I preferred giving my money to Cuban friends, but this meant that I had the challenge of transportation to and from the Palace of Conventions. Because of the blockade, Cubans have very limited access to fuel. This has dealt a severe blow to public bus service, upon which Cubans depend. Taxis and jitneys are scarce and much more expensive than the public buses used to be. Foreigners who stay in hotels have plush, air-conditioned hotel buses and don't have to wait for a ride. Delegates who stayed in hotels were in a bubble with 24-hour electricity, running water, and breakfast buffet. Ordinary Cubans deal with frequent blackouts and intermittent piped water, which has to be boiled or treated with special tablets to be drinkable. Delegates who came early were invited to pre-conference activities. One on December 7th was the release of a new book about Antonio Maceo, the general of African descent who led Cuban troops in the War of Independence from Spain. It was explained that with the shortage of paper, the book was only available online from the publisher, Casa Editorial Verde. And I have links if people would like the link to that book. At the same event, another book was presented, Aponte, written and illustrated by Enrique Arturo Lacoste Prince, about the leader of a famous slave revolt in Cuba in 1812. With the assistance of the United Nations Population Fund, Editorial Gente Nueva was able to print 3,000 copies of this graphic novel for youth. Concurrent activities were being hosted by the International Festival of Danzón and the New Latin American Film Festival. Attendance for these events was down because of the lack of transportation for locals. I did manage to make a party where artists and writers from the film festival were gathered. There I met Alexis Gonzalez Hernandez, a young artist who was inspired by Cuban revolts of enslaved people, as well as the Black Panthers in the United States. But many groups like the Thursday Poetry Group, which used to meet at Nicholas Guillen Foundation, and the Trade Union Chorus of the National Trade Union Chorus of Cuba, no longer meet because of the difficulty with transportation. On Sunday, before the conference, we were invited to meet a distinguished group of Afro-Cuban intellectuals at the National Union of Cuban Lawyers headquarters, hosted by the United Nations Association of Cuba. Among them were Gisela Arandia from the Cofradía de Negritud, researcher and writer Heriberto Ferraudi, Dr. Ana Morales Varela, who teaches at the Latin American School of Medicine, and her husband, Victor Dreke, who was Che Guevara's second in command in the Congo. I hear another voice. Perhaps people would like to mute. The December 12th movement out of New York sent the largest delegation of over 10 people. They included a number of articulate youth like Ariana Baldwin. Members of the December 12th movement had worked together, done joint fundraising to be able to attend, in contrast to people who came from DC who had not met together, even though we have a DC committee in solidarity with the Cuban Revolution, a chapter of the Black Alliance for Peace, and the All African People's Revolutionary Party, who campaigned to end the blockade. The Congressional Black Caucus Institute in DC, which produces the largest Black convention in the United States, sent two people, Kia Barron and Dorothy Davis, who is also a member of the African and American Women's Association. The All African People's Revolutionary Party brought 7 people from various places in the US and Jamaica. The Black Alliance for Peace was represented by Erica Cairns from Hood Communist, and Netfa Freeman of Voices with Vision on radio station WPFW. The conference formally opened on Monday, December 9th. At the opening, in addition to Cuban officials, we were greeted by Robert Ducey, the foreign minister of Togo, which has postponed the upcoming 9th Pan-African Congress until 2025. James Early, who is retired from the Smithsonian, gave some opening remarks and introduced actor Danny Glover, who has received high honors from the Cuban government for his steadfast support of Cuba. Both Danny and James have a history with the Institute of Policy Studies and Trans-Africa. Officials from UNESCO and the African Union greeted us via video. The second day was organized into 4 simultaneous breakout groups. 1, the work of Color Cubano, the Cuban agency organized to combat racism after much discussion. Number 2, the United Nations efforts to combat racism. 3, civil society and government efforts in various countries. And 4, the current state of racism in various countries. I had the pleasure of meeting Catherine Hall Trujillo from the Birthing Project in New Mexico, as well as a board member of IFCO Pastors for Peace, who recruits Black and Brown students in the United States to attend the Cuban medical school. On one of the panels, medical students from Africa, Caribbean, and the U.S. who attend the school spoke to us about their experiences receiving a free education to become a medical doctor to care for the underserved. The medical school is the Latin American School of Medicine, or ELAM for the initials in Spanish. In the evening, the conference delegates visited Parque Trillo, a historic park in Centro Habana, to learn about Quintín Banderas, a War of Independence hero who has a statue there, and who was assassinated in 1906 when he demanded his army pension. We were also treated to the music by Cesar Lopez Group. In Japan, Cesar plays with Herbie Hancock. On the third day, we visited the museum dedicated to the historic literacy campaign, in which children who could read and write went into the countryside to teach illiterate adults and children to read and write in the early 60s, right after the triumph of the revolution. These literacy teachers were attacked by counter-revolutionaries, and the first to die was a young Black man, Conrado Benitez. One of our delegates, who is studying in Oakland, California, but who came with his grandmother, who lives in DC, bore a distinct resemblance to Conrado Benitez. We also visited an elementary school where we were treated to student performances. The Afro-Latino Institute of Washington, D.C., represented by Roland Roebuck, donated school supplies, and the UN Population Fund donated the previously mentioned book about Aponte, who led the slave revolt in 1812. After the school, we visited a teacher training institute. In the afternoon, we visited a community art project conducted by Pedro Pulido, who uses recycled materials to create art, which covers an entire city block. In the evening, some of us were taken to a surprise meeting and reception with the president of Cuba, Miguel Diaz-Canel. On Thursday, there was a special trip to Matanzas, the birthplace of many famous Afro-Cuban musicians, such as Los Muñequitos de Matanzas. Current members are children and grandchildren of the original band members. Unfortunately, we were not able to hear Los Muñequitos because they were playing in Havana that night while we were in Matanzas. We heard another group with a similar multi-generational history, Orquesta Failde, which got everybody dancing. We also visited a plantation home in Matanzas, which had been restored to show how planters lived, and took pictures with the statue of Carlota, the Black woman who fought slavery, who led a slave revolt. In the city of Matanzas, we visited 2 centers where different African spiritual practices were preserved. On the last day, we went to the House of Africa, which is a cultural center for art and music in Old Havana. More Afro-Cuban rhythms and a street procession. Congresswoman Barbara Lee joined us, and I see that she's running for mayor of Oakland. After the House of Africa, I took Nisa Islam Muhammad from the final call to a nearby neighborhood to interview a Cuban English teacher on the effects of the blockade. Check the Final Call newspaper for an article about Cuba. In the afternoon at the conference closing in the Capitolio, we met Rob L. Pitts from Fulton County in Georgia, who wants to do business in Cuba. In the closing declaration, We acknowledge that the conference was attended by 103 Cuban delegates and 137 from the following countries: from the Americas, Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Barbados, Belize, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Costa Rica, United States, Guyana, Jamaica, Mexico, and Panama. From Africa, Angola, Benin, Cameroon, Comoros, Ghana, Niger, Senegal, Somalia, Togo, and Kenya. From Europe, delegates from Spain and Finland. And from Asia, representation from Laos, Syria, and Sri Lanka. In the closing declaration, which received a unanimous vote, we expressed our appreciation for Cuba holding the conference, acknowledging the singular role that Cuba has played in African liberation, the importance of education in African history and culture, the need for global measures to reduce the gap between rich and poor. We emphasize the need for delegates to stay in touch with each other and to continue working to promote and protect the rights of the people of African descent. We expressed our hope for the success of the upcoming 9th Pan-African Congress in Togo in 2025. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Sister Fatima, we're going to take questions for Lucy. So Sister Fatima, I'm surprised you're announcing yourself as a trainee, but let's make that a reality. So if you could come off mute, Sister Fatima, and see if there are any questions. If people can raise their hands if they have questions for Lucy. I do have one, but I'd like for others to go first. Thank you, Fatima.
All right. Can we take the first question, please?
I just have a comment. This is like, wow. But Barbara West has her hand up.
Fatima, recognize Barbara West.
You've got the floor, Barbara.
Thanks so much. It was a great report. And I'm awfully glad that you were able to represent us there. I wonder if you have any comments on the recent last-minute removal by President Biden of Cuba from the state sponsors of terrorism list. Something he could have done for 4 years and finally did in his last days, which Donald Trump will no doubt undo very promptly.
Exactly. I have no more to say.
Sister Teresa.
Thank you, Fatima. Well, Lucy, as you know, the second decade started on January 1, 2025, and it will go until December 31st of 2034. And just like the first decade, which ended December 31st, 2024, this decade is calling for recognition, justice, and development. And given that you and I are connected with the Convention for Pan-Africanism and Progress and the wars and wars and more wars across Africa, how do you see the UN decade impacting the colonial imperialist encroachment on Africa, facilitating all of the conflicts across Africa? How do you see the future for Africa in this next decade? What support do you see?
Well, I think it's interesting that some of the former French colonies are asking or getting the French to leave, talking about oh gosh, I should have the names of the countries in front of me, but Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and they are working together, which is revolutionary because, you know, many of the countries in Africa, it's easier for them to get to Europe. The flights and the travel patterns, easier to get to Europe than to travel from country to country within Africa because of the poor quality of the roads and the lack of air transportation between countries. They go to Europe more than they go, you know, amongst each other. So, you know, I think the BRICS, Brazil,
Russia, India,
India,
China,
China, and
South Africa.
South Africa, and Cuba and Bolivia are scheduled to join BRICS this year. And they really need trade partners who can stand up to the United States. Because Cuba is really, the blockade has really strangled the country in a way. It reminds you of the special period of the 90s in which people lost weight. I mean, they didn't get to actual starvation. People didn't die of starvation, but they definitely lost weight. And there was malnutrition among the children, which you can see in growth patterns. Our challenge is to work more with young people to get them involved. I was really impressed with the December 12th movement because they got so many young people to the, unfortunately, I was only able to get myself there. And that was interesting because I didn't think I would be able to go, but all of a sudden people called me up and decided to pay back loans and hire me for jobs and all kinds of things. So I was able to go. And we had Lydia Curtis, who has a program taking young people to countries in Africa and the Caribbean to better understand our history. You know, as we are able to support those kinds of efforts. And, you know, there's the recent victory of the African People's Socialist Party, who were accused of being agents
Uhuru.
of the Russian Uhuru, yes. But we're going to have to deal with a lot of false accusations and get tied up with legal cases, unfortunately. But we've got to do a lot of educating because so many people don't know where anything is in this world. So, you know.
Thank you, Lucy. I see George's hand is up, but several people have joined us. I don't recall we heard from Gloria McMillan, Linda Conti, or Robin Lloyd. So could you introduce yourselves? Gloria? Maybe she already introduced herself. What about you, Linda Conti? Where are you from and what's your branch?
I'm from just north of New York City. I'm a member of WILF, and I used to go to represent them at the UN. So I'm brand new at this point. I'm just learning about this, and I'm very glad to be a part of it.
Well, great. We're going to try to restart the New York City branch this year. It's a real goal. Gloria, did you
Linda,
get?
oh, excuse me, Linda, you mentioned you're north of New York City. How far north?
About an hour. I'm in Croton-on-Hudson.
Oh, famous
What's
place.
the name of your city, Linda?
Sorry?
What's the name of your city?
Croton-on-Hudson.
Okay.
I believe that's where the Clearwater festivals are held.
That's correct.
But Pete Seeger's project in that area.
Right.
Love Pete Seeger.
Miss
So let's get a little bit organized here. So Robin Lloyd, would you introduce yourself, Robin Lloyd?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Robin here, Burlington, Vermont, Wilf, and I feel I've been out of touch with a lot of folks for one reason or another, and I couldn't come on earlier because of a computer goof up. But anyway, here I am and glad to be here.
Thank you. So George, what's your question or comment?
I was really interested in hearing you say that at one point in the trip, they recognized or commemorated the spiritual practices from Africa. And I'm very interested in those. My great grandmother liked to tell us about some of them. So can you describe that a little bit? And I'll see if it compares to what Nini used to tell us.
Well, there were many different groups from Africa brought to Cuba, different languages, different musical patterns. And so we visited two separate spiritual houses and looked at the masks and the artifacts and the drums. And we got a little concert of the drums and chants.
Is it true that only the men can beat drums? Is that still a practice?
That is the Abaquois folks.
Okay.
Yes, they are. That is them. But there are other. Abaquois is not the only group. They're just very well known. It seems that they have produced a lot of the well-known musicians. The singer that I used to sing with, who died a few years ago, died in 2019, was Abaquois. But he was, a very interesting person. But he was a band leader, and Abaquois have produced a lot of band leaders and known percussionists.
Okay.
Well, thank you. What I hope we can talk about now is how the U.S. section, which will be by far the strongest section going into the world, the Wilf International Triennial, which will take place in 2026. And at that triennial, based on the resolution that George and I got passed, sponsored by the U.S. section at the last triennial in 2022, which calls for all sections to support the decade. And so that was the past decade. I'm pretty sure that in this upcoming triennial, we'll get started early with getting a resolution passed to support the second decade. So all sections are asked to report on what they have done in support of the decade over the past 3 years. So in the U.S. section, we can report that we established this working group and the work that we've been doing over the past 3 years since 2022. So that's going to look very good for the U.S. section. Fatima, do you have anything you want to say about the current reparations work. I know there was some struggles inside of in Cobra, but do you know of anything going on in terms of HR 40? I know there's been noises made about trying to push it forward, but what do you know about what's going on with the longtime John Conyers bill that was reintroduced over and over again? And when Sheila Jackson Lee passed away recently, it kind of lost momentum. So, do you have any reports on reparations work in the U.S., Fatima?
Yes, first, I would like to express my appreciation to Sister Lucy for the historical perspective because she shared things that people who were not able to make that trip would have no idea about. And they're not going to educate us about Cuba, especially Afro Cuba, in colleges or schools. So thank you very much for your valuable contribution. Now, month before last, there was a meeting held which everybody from Cobra to the NAACP and SCLC was there. The people of Afro descent from Houston, Texas were there. There were 116 people there, including Cobra and former Cobra members. And I really have to say it was very hopeful because everybody found a way to put aside their political differences, their personal differences, or whatever, and focus on how badly we need reparations and what we're up against. So it is, as far as our organizing in for those of us who are in the reparations battle, it's really looking good. Now, in terms of HR 40, Ayanna Pressley, the congresswoman from Massachusetts, has taken a stand, and she has reintroduced HR 40 for the 119th Congress. I received a letter from Sister Kenneth Henry, who is currently the Cobra female co-chair, and she was asking that we write our congressional people and ask them to Black caucus members and ask them to please co-sponsor the bill, because at this point, I have checked back and see what has happened. But at this point, when I received the letter last week from Kenneth, she was standing alone, and I respect and admire her for that. Now, the difference is that because of the way the November election went, there's going to have to be a whole different strategy, a whole different approach to things, because the Black Congressional Caucus, which was outnumbered in the first place, is really outnumbered now. And I don't know what to say about this government that's coming in. Everybody's going to be fighting about everything, including reparations. So I think it's going to call from some very strategic planning and a lot of determined support. And I think that we're going to have to work real hard to keep people from getting discouraged, because there was, I feel, an over dependency on the Democratic Party. Now, say what you will, the Democratic Party had from 1989 to 2024 to at least put HR 40 on the floor. Sheila Jackson Lee did get it cleared to go on the floor in 2021. And even though it was eligible for a congressional vote, they kept blocking it going to the floor. So while the Black Congressional Caucus, at least a good number of the Congressional Caucus members were doing their job for us, but they were greatly outnumbered. So the question we have to ask is, where were the rest of the Democrats? And maybe the
Okay,
between the
Fatima.
Hold on, let me finish the sentence and I'll hush.
Okay.
We need to renegotiate our whole relationship with American politics, be they Democrats or Republicans, because we're not in a really strong place right now. We may even lose civil rights if these people keep it up. So that's where we are.
Well, it is your opinion, and I appreciate your perspective. But the Democratic Party has used Black people to win. They can't win without us. But what they have failed to do is organize the white working class from siding with racism and white supremacy, which is why they got spanked down in the ground in November of 2024. And Trump's victory was across the board. So wealth is nonpartisan. And we may have members inside of wealth who are actually Republicans. But what we have to understand as a people, Fatima, is that the Green Party of the United States is the only party that had reparations for descendants of enslaved Africans in their platform. The Democratic Party has refused to put reparations in its platform forever. Since John Conyers first introduced HR 40 in the 80s, the Democratic Party never sided with him. And Nancy Pelosi told him no way when he was head of judiciary and he promised to move the HR 40 to the floor. Nancy Pelosi told him no. So that's who the Democratic Party is. So let's be clear. Now, Trump, interestingly enough, is not as clear as that, and he needs Black votes. So what will he do in this period? I agree. I can understand why Michelle Obama and Nancy Pelosi are not going to the inauguration of him because he is a danger. There's no question about it. But the only thing that wins anything for Black people, no matter who is president, is building the mass movement. That's what I learned in the 60s when we went through Nixon and we went through Reagan. When we build the mass movement, we can win. So we have to get better organized with the working group, Fatima, so that we are actually having a strategy for how we do what we said we were going to do when we first got started, that we would have branches in every city and state where branches exist to build reparations ordinances, because the strategy is to do it locally. So we get a local ordinance passed like they have done in Durham, North Carolina, like they have done in many cities, in Boston, in other places. Can you get one in New Orleans? Because I'm working on one in Columbus, Georgia, to be passed by 2028 with a focus on housing. So at the next meeting in February, we're going to talk about reparations ordinances where they have been passed and where they can be passed. There's several potential in the metro Atlanta area, in Fulton County, DeKalb County, and other places. So maybe the metro Atlanta branch can report on that from the ordinances being passed. And there may actually be one that was passed in the colony of DC. Do you know, Lucy, did a reparations ordinance get passed in DC yet?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Well, we know that that can happen in what used to be called Chocolate City, and it still is with the government. So I'm sure the white allies will probably get on board. I know they do in Durham and they do in Atlanta. So let's see if the Black people can take the lead and get the white allies on board. Can we do it in San Jose? Can we do it in Tucson? Can we do it in Burlington, Vermont? Can we do it in all these places where the branches exist? So George and I have an important announcement about a webinar that's coming up in March. It's called Women in Conflict Zones. And the Women in Conflict Zones webinar is being sponsored by Code Pink, the International Peace Bureau, World Beyond War, and CPP, the Convention for Pan-Africanism and Progress. We're working with Kofi and Yanaka on that, and Southern Anti-Racism Network. We are the 5 co-sponsors of this major webinar. And the countries that we've identified as conflict zones are Belarus, Cameroon, Democratic Republic of Congo, of course, Gaza, Palestine, Lebanon, Nigeria, Mozambique, Sudan, Syria, and South Korea. There are 10 conflict zones that will be represented in this webinar. And the women will speak for 5 minutes each on the impact of the conflicts on women and children in their countries. It will happen on March 19th at 12 noon p.m. So mark your calendar. World Beyond War has a Zoom account that will accommodate 1,000 people. And World Beyond War is doing the heavy lifting. George and I worked with World Beyond War in 2020 when we did a webinar with the Disarm Committee, Disarm in Wars Committee of WILF. George and I helped to organize that webinar in December of 2020, AFRICOM out of Africa. And as you can see from the list of countries, there are many conflicts on the continent, Sister Lucy. And so when we have our next meeting of CPP, we'll be talking about it. I'm just trying to get Pasika to give us the name of the woman from Mozambique who's going to be speaking. And so that's the contribution that CPP is making, getting the speaker from Mozambique. But we have all the other 9 speakers confirmed. We just need CPP. So if you can help us, I sent an email to the brothers to try to get them to produce the person because I know they're concerned about the connectivity problems in Africa, but the person can record their 5-minute presentation and it can be played. And if the person can join for the Q&A part, because it's a 90-minute video, dear sisters. So just like with the AFRICOM out of Africa, we will be asking all branches to endorse. So the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom as a whole in the U.S. section, we're asked to endorse. WILF International Secretariat has been helping supply speakers. So they offered us a speaker from Sudan. So we have the wonderful Reem Abbas, who will be speaking from Sudan, thanks to Sophie of WILF International Secretariat. And WILF International has agreed to promote the webinar widely in February through their newsletter on all their social media. So we're looking to get many of the sections around WILF International in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in the Americas to endorse. So our goal is 100 endorsing organizations. We expect Black Alliance for Peace, UFPJ, Veterans for Peace, UNAC, all will endorse, because we want to get at least 500 people in that webinar hearing the stories of the women, because I know when they hear from Gaza, everybody's going to be crying. So we want to make sure that this webinar, organized by George and Teresa from the Southern Anti-Racism Network, because we couldn't get the outgoing president of the U.S. section to kind of work with us, I'm sorry to say. And so it just got to be too much. So we hope that the U.S. section under new leadership will endorse the webinar. And I understand this is being recorded. And so I'm speaking the truth. And so I don't worry when I'm speaking the truth. So we have a few minutes left before we need to end. So could we hear any final words from anybody who would like to speak? Raise your hand now, because if not, we want to hear final words from Lucy, because I agree with Joan Goddard. Wow, I had no idea that it was that kind of a mobilization from around the world to Cuba for this special meeting. We owe Cuba a great debt forever and ever and ever, what Cuba has done. And we must fight for Cuba to stay off the terrorism list and to end the embargo. That was what we needed to have done, is to end the embargo. So if we can get Congress to end the embargo through a mass movement effort, let's try to make that happen. So any last words from anyone before we turn it over to Lucy, and then we'll announce our next meeting. Joan is writing stuff in the chat, so George will save the chat and the recording and send it out to all of us. But Lucy, any last words, since you were our eminent person this meeting, and that was such a powerful report with those details about who was there. I really appreciated knowing that. And Danny Glover, we love him, don't we?
Yes.
He does show up. So any words from you, Lucy?
Just that in terms of conflict zones, I'm not sure if I heard Yemen mentioned.
We had Code Pink find a speaker for Yemen, and she backed out. So the problem is, as in Ukraine, we could not get the speaker from Ukraine because if you oppose the war in Ukraine, you're considered a traitor. So we had to get a speaker from Belarus to make the connection between Ukraine and Belarus and what's happening in that region. But we did have a speaker for a short moment from Yemen, but when she backed out, we couldn't get anyone else from Yemen. So we would like to have gotten a speaker from Somalia as well. And I noticed that the organization that keeps track of conflict zones definitely has Mozambique on their list. And so that's why it's so urgent that CPP gets Mozambique for us to round out our numbers so that we have the 10 women speaking that we had hoped to have from 10 different conflict zones. So Mozambique is the last of the conflict zones. We have 9 confirmed and people who are excited about speaking and ain't scared, not one bit. So the people we have speaking, they have been telling us how happy they are to do it. So in South Korea, it'll be 2 a.m. in the morning. And I said to George, is that person really going to be with us? And George said she sent her bio and everything. So it'll be the next day, 2 a.m. in South Korea. But this is a webinar people don't want to miss. All women speaking about the impact of war on women and children. That's our meeting for tonight.
Yeah,
We meet.
Teresa, I
Yes,
would just
Robin.
like to say, I don't understand the various organizations that are promoting reparations. I remember in Cobra, and then now I'm hearing about other organizations. I'm sort of wondering why people aren't working within Cobra. And so someone needs to, maybe in a future meeting, we can discuss the history of what's happening with the organizing for reparations.
Oh, well, we will have that conversation in a Black Liberation Caucus meeting, because that is a family conversation. And it basically gets to the root of why is Black unity so hard to achieve. That is the deeper question. As we look at Africa, we know that Black unity is hard to achieve. That is the fundamental root cause of that problem. But there are, we did a survey once, Sam Anderson and I, and it was like 80 different organizations working on reparations in the Black liberation movement in the US. 80. So we all work on it. Southern Anti-Racism Network works on it, and we're working in Columbus, Georgia. And so people are working locally, they're working nationally. And I say, I don't worry so much about the fragmentation, Lucy, because it's just who we are. That's the feature of the Black liberation movement, is fragmentation. Saladin Muhammad talked about it all the time, the fragmentation. So that's what the reason is, to sum it up. So at any rate, we meet on the first Wednesday at 6:30 of every month. And I believe our next meeting is maybe, if somebody can pull out a calendar, the first Thursday.
It's February 6th.
The UN Decade meets. So I think the third is Monday. What is it, George? Okay, February 6th
February
is our
6th.
next. February what?
6th.
6 at 6:30. We will meet again. So we had a really well-attended meeting tonight. We have a quorum of 5 that we require in order to do the meeting.
Okay, you're done.
And I believe, how many participants do we have this time? We have 10. Great. Well, good night, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And hopefully we'll see some of you on Sunday. We'll see some of you on Sunday for Border Migration Justice at 5 p.m. With Adrian Bernal.
Yeah.
Well,
I suggest coming on the call at 8 o'clock tonight to see the new website of WILF.
I will be there.
Good. I hope others will too.
I will too.
Okay, well, we'll see you in a few minutes.